So my name is Logan Britton. I am currently coming off of serving as a chair of the graduate student section. We, GSS leadership, put this session together based off a survey that we conducted last fall with graduate students, and we kept on hearing every single participant in that survey talked about either mental health, diversity and inclusion, and that work-life balance, mental health, and we thought we could do a kind of a catch-all. Some of these topics we could have a full track session about. But we kind of just wanted to cater to our graduate students and maybe provide some insight from seasoned veterans and just those willing to share their insight. We'll go person by person of our panelists and let them have about 10 minutes to talk. If we have time, we'll proceed with questions. But then we've allowed time at the end of the panel discussion to have any questions from anybody else. So I believe, Kate, you are first, and so I'll let you take it away.
I guess it helps to unmute. I am going to see if I can share the correct screen here. Can you see my screen? All right. Hopefully you see the actual PowerPoint and not a noted one, correct? When you have two screens, it pops them both up. Okay, so I am an associate professor here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I teach agribusiness management classes. So as I go through this, you'll realize I'm kind of taking some of this from some of my management courses, as well as from an economics kind of standpoint as we can talk about some of this. I really wish we were in person because I think we could come up with a lot more discussion into how some of us have all handled this or things that we think about to try to handle this. So I may ask a few questions, and if you guys want to pipe up, you're more than welcome to comment anything. The OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, they put out a research paper topic kind of looking about employees and work-life balance across the entire world. They actually find that 11% of employees in the United States work over 50 hours per week. Now, as some of the other faculty on here, when you think about 50 hours per week, we probably even put in more hours per week, depending on classes and research that's going on. Maybe not every week, but several weeks I could count throughout a year where I've probably put in more than 50 hours per week. And that full-time workers devote at least 60% of their day on average to personal care and leisure. But when you think about 60 hours per day on average to personal care and leisure, that leaves you about 14 hours that were in that personal care and leisure. And so if you think about that 14 hours, 8 of that's potentially sleeping if you get your good 8 hours of sleep. Then you start thinking, well, some of that's actually even commuting to and from work. I drive, some days it takes me 45 minutes to an hour to and from work. So you start decreasing that amount of time that you're in something other than a work type situation, right? Some of us can do other things in our commute, like listening to self-help books, maybe getting audio books, thinking about just the research. Sometimes my commute ends up in my personal life being me contemplating what I'm going to teach the next day, or how I'm going to write a quiz, or that research grant that I need to put together. So some of those come about in other areas as well. But to lighten it a little bit, see if I can get it to switch slides. There we go. Everybody knows Dilbert the cartoon, so I thought I'd throw this in here. You know, the secret to having a rewarding work-life balance is to have no life. Well, then it's easy to keep things balanced by doing no work. Well, so that's simple and yet so genius, right? It was hiding in plain sight. I had someone else, when I told them I was giving this topic, said, well, just have no life and then your work-life balance is equivalent, right? I've seen the other flip-flop too, right? That it's all about life. So, you know, the question really does become, what is work? What is life? And to some extent, some of those may come across together, but some might be slightly different. If we think of work-life balance as an economist, we can actually go back. There's research on the income-leisure equilibrium. I assume most of us have probably heard something along those lines, probably maybe even in fundamental ag economics, you did something with your indifference curves between leisure and work. Both bring us some type of utility, right? Income brings us utility, plus it allows us to do some of those leisure activities and buy bigger houses and cars. But when you think about the leisure income piece, that assumes typically an hourly wage, right? So if we work more, we get more income. How many of you are in a per hour work situation? Most of us, we're all in graduate programs or faculty. We are now going to, you know, have a set salary. And so if we work more hours, we don't get more income. And our supply is fixed. You can think of that as being 24 hours per day, 365 days a year, right? 7 days a week. So that piece is fixed. So it becomes this demand side, right? We only have 24 hours to try to divide everything we have in life going on, okay? And this is really where I'd like to have a discussion. I know it's not very easy, but if anybody wants to chime in, you know, what things do you get from your utility of work, right? We work and we know we're salaried, but is there utility you get from working more? Or why do we want to work more rather than just the 8 hours a day?
You can submit your questions or discussion in the chat box if you don't want to unmute yourself.
See if anybody brings anything up.
Hi, this is Yui from Cornell here. I can chime in a little bit. Thank you for the great, interesting introduction on this. So I was wondering, so basically, I think work more just gives kind of finishing the project, gives that satisfaction. That's kind of utility that I get for working more, but I don't know about others. Thank you.
So somebody in the chat said they enjoy learning about the ag economic topics, right? The research that fuels that discovery. So diving in more. So anybody else? I won't stay too long since I only have 10 minutes, but if you think, you know, that trade-off there, when we think about other things for work, right? If we work more, we can get more work done. Maybe some of that utility is trying to advance our career. Some of us get utility about having those higher levels of career pieces. Some of us get utility about having more promotions. And so that may come with having more work hours put in to get those promotions. Some of us might get utility out of joining committees. And again, that may put in more work hours for us. So there's a lot of things in there in work that we probably get utility out of just besides just the income. Because if it was just income, we would all put the bare minimum in, right? And just do what we have to do for the 8 hours to be done. But then when you think about life, right? What do you guys get from utility of life? Ariel, you say it as an investment for your future, your career.
It's actually not me. There's several people with my name. Apparently they choose a link. So there's a bunch of Ariels. So if anyone says something silly under my name, no, just kidding. Okay, so I'm out.
So family time, fishing, joy, right? So we all probably have different aspects of life that we enjoy. And maybe part of our career somewhat overlaps with our life, right? Hopefully we all chose our careers because we enjoy what we're doing. You know, I get utility out of teaching students. And so part of my life is devoted to helping teach and further students. Somebody says creative pursuits, right? So, you know, and a lot of times the previous, you know, analysis of work-life balance kind of is just leisure in general, but I think it's not just about leisure time, right? It's about family time. It's about friendships, loving life, dating, hobbies, interests, you know, exercise, health, your personal me, right? So your faith, someone else put in there, right? So there's a lot of pieces. It's not as simple as just work and life. I'm very interested that we keep coming sometimes back to just this work and life, but I think some of those can overflow together as well. So if we think it in a strategic management terms, right? I'm going to come back to kind of a class. So, you know, if you think about it from a strategic management terms, if you're thinking about your life, your work, your career, all of that, you know, the thing we do with the business and say is, well, what is your mission statement? So if you think about your life, what are your lifetime goals, right? Do you want to have a successful career and be the dean of a college? Do you want to be a CEO of a company, right? That can still be part of your life, but that might be your mission. But at the same time, maybe you want to have a bigger faith. Maybe you want to have a family with 5 kids, right? And we know there's trade-offs in some of that, and some of it's the devotion you have to those. And what I say works for me isn't going to work for anybody else in here. And we have to understand that we shouldn't care what other people think, right? It's about our mission in life and what we want to accomplish. And so that's where we start to see some of those trade-offs. And then once you kind of have that mission, right, what are your goals, your short-term, intermediate, long-term, right? What do I want to accomplish this week, this month, this year? Sometimes for me, when I'm thinking about my work-life balance, it's this semester, okay? I'm teaching X amount of classes this semester. I have this much research to do. In my family life, these are the things we want to accomplish. And then how am I going to try to divide my time across those? Sometimes, I like this quote I found, is you need to step outside, get air, and remind yourself of who you are and who you want to be, right? Sometimes I get bogged down in the work life or the family life and feel like, well, I'm spending too much time with family right now and not getting enough work done, or vice versa. But you know, what is our mission? And we have to know that sometimes those are going to be trade-offs between the two. Sometimes we're going to spend more amount on work and sometimes on life, depending on where we're at within those goals. I think I'm out of time, so I'll try to hurry this up. There's just a few more quotes I was going to throw at you. Dolly Parton said, "Don't get so busy making a living that you forget to make a life." But for some, career is part of that life. A lot of the quotes I kept saying was, you know, don't focus so much on your career, focus more on life. But to me and to some of us, we value that career too, right? And so there's that intertwine between those. The other one said, most of us spend too much time on what is urgent and not enough time on what is important. And so I think as you're trying to balance that work and life, what you think is urgent at work or family maybe isn't necessarily urgent. And if you focus on, you know, the big important things, then it might help balance some of that. And then there's one that says there's no such thing as work-life balance. It's all life. So kind of what I was saying a little bit ago, right? It has to come within us, right? We're the ones that make those life choices. And then there's consequences for doing that. And so it has to come with us to try and balance it for ourselves. Back to what is your mission? What is your goals for the next couple weeks, the next year, you know, your lifetime? And then the last one I'm going to say is you aren't perfect. All you can be is your best. Be your best at work, be your best at home. And if you can't spend the time you want in an aspect of your life, be your best at when you are in it, to be in harmony, right? Think about quality over quantity for sometimes, right? So if I'm at home with my kids, shutting my phone off, shutting the emails off, right? And spending that quality time there. But yet when I'm at work, try to set off the point that making those appointments for people, you know, going and doing things, I have a set time to do those as well so that I can focus on my work when I'm at work. And so trying to set some of those apart. And last, I'm going to say, it's okay to say no. It's okay to not always say you're going to do everything for everybody. And saying no is something that we all should probably take more advantage of. So with that, any questions or comments?
I have time for one quick question if anybody has it. If not, we can save some questions for the end of the panel. So thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
And I believe next is Ariel. So Ariel, you should be able to share your screen now.
Let me see. So let me see. Share screen. Let me start sharing this. Okay. Can you hear me well and see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So thank you, Logan, for the invitation, and thank you for everyone for showing up. So let me just put my timer here. So I'm Ariel Ortiz-Bobea, and I'm now, since I guess July, an associate professor at the Dyson School at Cornell University. And I want to start talking, so I'm going to talk about mental health. And when I got the invitation to talk about this, I was like, why me? Like, what do I know about this? And actually, so just disclaimer is that I'm not a mental health expert. I don't do even research on mental health. I don't suffer from a mental illness, illness. And so because of that, my outlook is going to be limited, right? So there's people who have mental health illnesses, and then because of that, learn so much about mental health that that is actually not my case. But so what I can give you is my outlook based on observations over the past, I guess, 12 years as a grad student at Maryland, and then as a researcher and professor over the past 7 years. Initially, I thought, like, what could I say? And then I, thought back about, times in my, over those past, 10, 12 years where I've, struggled, and cried over, been depressed about, failures and things like that. It's like, well, I've learned a trick or two about how to cope with those situations. And then that's what I hope to share with you today. So in terms of some of the basics, so I got this from the CDC website. So there's a difference between mental health and mental illness. So think about mental health, it's just an analog to your physical health. So, there's, mental health includes your emotional, psychological, and social well-being. Okay. So that's really the core of, what we mean by mental health. So we all have a mental health, right? We don't have necessarily a mental illness, although it's very widespread. Mental illnesses are different. So that's a condition that affects person's thinking, feeling, mood, or behavior, such as depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia. So think about mental health as just something that we all have. Sometimes we have up and downs. There's normal fluctuations in that at different stages in your life. And then there's some people that, for various reasons, trauma when they're early, trauma in their life, or genetic predisposition, they have chemical imbalances, and they're more affected about these mental illnesses, although those are not we're not immune to any of these, right? So I like that quote from the CDC website, is that a person can experience poor mental health and not be diagnosed with a mental illness. And likewise, a person that has a mental illness can experience periods of, physical, mental, and social well-being. So they're not exactly the same. So when you say mental health, it's you just don't, it's not a simple, it's not interchangeable with illness, obviously. Okay. So, and you can read more on that website, and I'm happy to share the slides later. So I was thinking about talking about this. So I started thinking, well, what are some of the sources of stress and anxiety and depression, as grad students, and then as early career, researchers, and some of these, and this is by no means exhaustive. So one of them is, as Kate was talking about, is, the struggle between work and life balance, right? So people feeling burnout, feeling like, work never ends, feeling like when you take a break, your brain keeps working. It's very difficult to disconnect when you're really deep into something, and feeling like that's like an exhausting thing, kind of weighing you down. Other sources are, say, what's probably happening right now. Okay, so uncertainty about the job market, job placement. Am I going to get a job? If you're an international student, am I going to get a job? I'm going to get a visa. I'm going to, there's so many things that add to that anxiety. And then when you get a job, then you start worrying about tenure. Okay, I'm going to get a tenure. Do I have to move somewhere else after, a few years? So that's another one. And this maybe happens more the first year of grad school. It's like, what am I doing here? Everyone, I guess, at some point, taking that micro, micro class with Mascolel, figuring out like, what is this? Why am I doing this to myself? And so many times you might even, wonder, what, is this the right thing for me to do? So that might be also a source of anxiety that maybe you're wasting your time even in grad school. As you get along, you advance in your, more into getting into research, you might be wondering, is your work, maybe you feel like your work is not appreciated. Maybe you feel like that's a next bullet point, that people are better than you, right? And then you feel like there's a competition, it's too cutthroat. Other people do better than you, or you have fewer papers, fewer citations, fewer grants, you don't have awards. And that feeling of always being, sort of left behind. And then also loneliness and feeling that you're, especially, nowadays with the pandemic, that you don't, that you're kind of on your own. And especially when you have, say, hopefully you don't have to face this, but you have, an abusive supervisor. So those are some of the kind of the issues that you have. So what I'm going to do now in the 4 minutes that I have left is to talk about a couple of advices, and then some best practices. So the first advice that I give, is that you have to appreciate your identity. And so what I mean by that is that you have to understand that there's a difference, and appreciate that difference between who you are and what you do. So you are a full-fledged person beyond your title and your work. So you're not your papers, right? You're not your work. So when people are criticizing you, they're not criticizing you. And the more you appreciate that difference, I think the better off you will be. We've spent so much time in our jobs doing our research that we have a sense that there's, it's sort of that it's the same. Your job, what you do, is part of you, is not nearly most of you. So that's a very important distinction to make, and to try to cultivate, right? So things that will remind you that you're more than your job and your occupation are things that you do beyond your job, right? So this is what I mean by try to nurture other parts of your life that enhance that identity. So talk to non-economists. We tend to, when we hang out, just talk about work. Just don't do that. It's good to have economist friends, but just don't overdo the economists, right? Join clubs, do activities that are unrelated to your work. Have a significant other that, or roommates are not economists, and that can sort of change a little bit what you're thinking of. And then obviously keep in touch with, friends and family. Always is something very important. So that's for advice one. The other one is to understand and try to really clarify what brought you here. And what I mean by what brought you here, so what brought you to want to get a research degree. Okay, so people, sometimes I hear, oh, I want to be a professor. That's not a very deep question. Okay, reason for getting a research degree. There's always something deeper that motivates you. What is it that you like? Are you just inherently very curious, and you're, or is it the flexibility? You don't want to have a boss. You have to try to understand exactly what is it that you like about being, trying to get a PhD, because that will help you understand and cope with what is coming next. So if you have your mindset that I want to be a professor, and that's the only thing, anything other than that might feel like failure if you come it that way. But if you understand that what you like about research, there's some specific thing that you really enjoy, and then maybe you don't get it in academia. You could get it in the private sector. You can get it in government. So it sort of helps you understand yourself about what is it that you appreciate about these the day-to-day life of doing research, or just getting the research degree. And you might really understand that maybe an academic position is not for you. Okay, so because that's not really, you sort of have this idea what being a professor is, and maybe that's not really what you want. So in that vein, I really encourage students to think about other outlets, right? It's not only academic, but government, industry, and NGOs as well. So, and then these reasons obviously can always change. When I got, I think I'm over time, but and I won't talk about my case, but these things can change over time. The last advice, piece of advice, is that you have to develop your own coping mechanisms. There's so much rejection in our profession. Everything, papers, grants, jobs, everything is about rejections. So you have to find a way to expect rejection. You give your best, but you always have to expect it so that you don't become disillusioned when you are rejected, because you will be rejected, okay? So you just have to make it so that it's a normal thing, and then you just celebrate the little, the successes, but always expect that rejection. And surround yourself with people who are not bringing you down. If someone makes you feel poorly, don't go there. Like the Economic Job Market Rumor Forum is terrible. I never visited. I don't think I just don't go there because it's just a cesspool of stuff. And so I don't like that. So if I can just finish with some best practices that I think that are very important, is that when you're feeling down, and just know that you have to ask for help, okay? And know who to go to, right? Whether it's your advisor or some ally in your department, or friends. Don't fight it out, on your own. Something that I cannot recommend enough is to sleep. I've never regretted sleeping, oversleeping or oversleeping. You never oversleep. I don't think you can really oversleep. There's nothing like it. Okay. So always sleep everything that, as much as you can. And then to take the time off whenever you can, know, make sure that you take that time off. Okay. Otherwise you burn out. Exercise every day. I cannot repeat that enough. You have to exercise every day. Preferring in the morning, I would say, because it just clears your mind. It's a escape valve for pressure. Another thing is that you never compare yourself to others. Some people that know everyone's CVs, like, just don't do that, because you keep, trying to compare yourself, and that's a source of anxiety. I don't do that, and I encourage other people to not do that. And last but not least, be kind to others always. And you should have harvest what you sow. So when you're kind and constructive with other people, you have more people doing that, and then you'll have a group of supporting people around you, and you attract that. So that's what I have for now. And sorry I went over time. Thanks.
No worries. We are kind of running a little short in time, so we'll. I think Jessica has some questions in the box, but
let me just stop sharing. Okay, thanks.
And Norbert is next, so take it away. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It is always good to be able to talk about experiences and ways that we can become a better association. I'll tell you a little bit of a story about myself, and also, as I've watched the presentations, I realized maybe I needed to reorient my presentation a touch, and so I may be adjusting it a little bit on the fly. I will go ahead and share my screen so that I can share with you. Oh goodness, I hope I can share with you what I had developed. For some strange reason, I'm not seeing it. There we go. Let's see if I can do it now. Oh, goodness me. I'm trying to find, okay, there we go. Too many windows open, that's my problem. I was asked to speak about diversity and inclusion in academia. And I gotta say, this is a complicated time. And I'll be 100% honest with you, the last 6 or so months have been really challenging. Just for a little context, I'm from rural Georgia, small town. My hometown, which is about 75% African American, was really hit pretty significantly by the COVID virus. a number of people in my community were infected and died. On a relative basis, it was a fairly large percentage, but and it was hard. My parents still live there. But part of that story, part of that COVID story that we're all kind of experiencing is the overlays of race and economic inequality that led to some of the challenges that we see with COVID in my community, but throughout. And we know when we look at the numbers, African-American and Latinx communities are hit more than others when it comes to COVID infections. And so because of these reasons, this last several months have been difficult. And then you add on top of that the murder of a number of African Americans, men and women, at the hands of others, particularly police and other actors. And so for all these reasons, I have personally been pretty affected by the current state of affairs. I'll add one more thing to this. Given all this, I've been asked in multiple instances to come on and to speak about diversity and inclusion. And I'm grateful. This is important. We need to have these conversations. I only wish we had had these conversations long ago. I wish we were having these conversations many, many years ago. And I think we would see, well, we wouldn't be where we are today. So I feel that's important to begin as a sort of a proviso or sort of a preamble to my presentation. I realize now, as I said, I failed to appreciate my audience, and so forgive me. I realize that this is a group of graduate students, and so some of my conversation is around the importance or the need for diversity and inclusion, but I do want to talk a little bit more about what AggieCon could do, or the challenges of AggieCon in not dealing with diversity and inclusion. I don't think I have to spend a great deal of time, moved a little too quickly there, about why we need diverse voices in academia. And I would say this would be true also for governments or governmental jobs, but because I've worked in academia, I will speak more about that. We need it, and this is where I would say academia and government differ, it is to enhance teaching. We need to have diverse voices, diverse experiences that come into the classroom so that students can see examples of themselves. I did my undergraduate at the University of Georgia and my PhD at UC Davis, and at no point did I ever have a person of color as a professor in agricultural economics. No Blacks or African Americans, no Latinos, no Asian Americans, none. And I think I only had maybe 2 women at most. So I missed out on seeing people who were like me, to have that encouragement. While many people were good to me and kind to me, having that experience matters. We need to bring in different perspectives to our students. Our students are in the process of development. And the way we help people develop is by exposing them to different perspectives and ideas. And it's harder to do that when the instructors are fairly homogeneous. We need this to challenge perspectives, or persistent narratives, which can be perspectives. I remember as a student, another student who was in agriculture, we were in different degrees, but still in agriculture, made this comment about making the assumption that because I was Black, that I had kind of gone against the way he had understood Black people because he had only seen local news, and that experience for him suggested that African Americans were, well, going to jail. And that was a real problem for him in terms of what he expected and could imagine about what my life and the lives of others could be. We need greater diversity in terms of research because it challenges established ideas. It allows us to ask new questions. I want to talk about this a little bit more when I talk about AggieCon, and it brings in narratives of more people. This lack of diversity, and I want to say some of the things that Ariel said, I think are things that can generate some of the anxiety and stress because of the conformity of thought. We are so frequently in academia forced to think like so many others. And while we reward people for innovation, that innovation has to be one that is not too different than what we typically think is important. But that lack of diversity means that we're not asking different questions, and we typically will downplay difference. You really can't be that different if you're one of us. Also, this idea of diversity can lead to other issues, but I want to focus a little bit more on what we can see in Ag Econ. And so what we have here are some challenges that I think are important for us to consider about what we have or have not done in Ag Econ. We've missed some really important questions. I'm just going to mention a few. I'll tell you right now, there's some conversations going on in the association thinking about how do our journals open up for greater diversity, what kinds of things need to show up. And when you look at our journals, and I've done this work to see what topics have we covered, and I'm going to be very specific about the US case. Obviously, our world is very different. Our organization is international. I recognize that, but I'm going to speak of the organization that I, if you will, grew up in, which was originally called the American the American Association of Agricultural Economics. And while that US focus has its limits, I do want to talk about how we've not paid attention to the concerns of, and I'm going to speak specifically of African Americans, of Blacks in America. And we have virtually nothing in our journals about Black farmer land loss. There are a number of folks that are 1890 institutions, the historically Black land grant institutions, that have tried to address these issues, have thought about them, but those topics don't frequently, if ever, show up in our journals. Issues around rural well-being and poverty are ones that are really important. If you look at the South, or the persistence of poverty in the South and the overlay of African Americans, and you can see some important topics to consider. Some of you may know of the Pickford versus Glickman case. It was the lawsuit that Black farmers brought against the U.S. Department of Agriculture for discriminatory policies. And we got to that place that it had to take a lawsuit because I would dare argue we weren't researching these topics. I would say that the association, that the profession has failed because we didn't cover some of these issues. I want to talk very briefly for some ways that we can move forward because I think I'm near out of time. I want to check my clock. We've got to invest. If we're going to see diversity and inclusion happen, we have to invest the money. That means faculty lines, that means scholarship money to go towards students of color. We've got to invest the time. It is not just about bringing people in and expecting people to flourish just on their own without investing the time. But that time also requires time getting to know the other. Many of the challenges that we're facing now, many of the conversations around diversity and inclusion that we're experiencing now are because people had not spent the time and the effort to get to know people different than themselves. I won't go into all the research around the issues or the challenges or the lack of experiences of whites versus people of color in terms of diversity of friends that they have or the colleagues that they have or the neighborhoods or the communities that they grew up in. I'll give you one quick example. When I was a faculty member at Auburn University, I taught a class where I took students abroad, and I had a student who was in his last semester as a master's in education, in agricultural education. He grew up in Alabama, he was a white male, and had never had a faculty member or instructor of any type from K all the way through master's program who was a person of color. And this was someone who was going into education back in his home community that was diverse because it was in Alabama. And so I raised this point that we have students who are not getting exposed to difference. And that is a real challenge because these are individuals who are going to go back into communities where that's going to be important. We also need to spend political and social capital. Again, we have to extend ourselves in order to make some of these differences happen. So I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to stop my slide. I do appreciate the opportunity to talk about these issues. There are lots of other folks of color who could have had this position and talked about these issues. And there's so many other ways we could have talked about these topics. I hope that this is the beginning of a conversation, or I actually really hope this is a continuation of conversations that you all are having. We are not going to make progress in these spaces unless we do this. One last thing I'll add, and I really want to encourage you. if you are going to continue on in our profession, and if you're going to be in the US, I encourage you to think about some of these topics that affect communities of color. And I encourage you not to limit it to issues about inequalities or about persistent problems of poverty. People of color have experiences that are rich and meaningful, that are beyond just narrow experiences of deficit. My encouragement is explore, have conversations, think broadly about how all of these individuals are adding to the richness and the beauty of what is our nation. So I thank you for your time, and I'd love to hear some of your thoughts. Thank you for the thank yous.
Thank you, Norbert. Yeah, and we have time for maybe one quick question. Anybody? Either chat or unmute.
I'll ask a question on behalf of students, and if they, I'll try to make it student oriented. So Norbert, Ariel here. So what would you say to grad students who are now, say, entering the market, right, about this? Say that you're not, if you're a foreign student or a white American student, like, and you're coming in, like, what would you say to those students?
Yeah, I would say, and I'm gonna actually pick up on your question, and I think, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name, Matthews. Forgive me, I'm not sure. It's good to see. He was asking also how to encourage African-American students to major in Ag Econ. I would dare argue the way we can do it is by offering opportunities to explore topics, for example, that are relevant for us. I must admit, when I took my undergraduate agricultural economics class, I got so excited about Ag Econ because I had a professor, a guy named Joe Broder, who I think is still at Georgia in an administrative position. And one of the things he did was he opened up my eyes to the kinds of questions that I could begin asking. I'm from, again, rural Georgia, and there was an issue, and I want to approach this with a bit of care, that was relevant for my community. There were high rates of teen pregnancy in the community. And that is not an Ag Econ topic. But at my first paper that I did at AAEA meeting was on the issues around teen pregnancy in rural Georgia. It was my first statistical analysis of something. And oh gosh, I would never want to see that paper surface anywhere. But the point is, it was a question that was important to me. It was affecting my community in a meaningful way, and giving me that space and fostering and encouraging me to explore that topic made me want to dig in deeper. And I think sometimes we discourage that kind of innovation or discussion of topics that are different than what we traditionally do. We have to have ag economists working on issues around farm credit and land values, and we need resource economists talking about water. And I value that. I'm saying this is important. We shouldn't not do those things. But we also need to have space for people to explore why is it that African-American farmers have disappeared? And what is the meaning of land ownership for these different folks? How important is heirs property and its effect on economic well-being of people of color? And I'm sure if we talk more, people of Latin experience could bring in other questions, and people who are Native American could talk about other things. And I'm not saying that you can only talk about the things of your own ethnic background, but I am saying bringing those individuals into the discussion allows for questions that would not be asked otherwise. So I think I've spoken enough. I'm going to shut down, and would love to add more later.
Thank you. Last but not least is Kathleen. So Kathleen, the floor is yours.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
I can hear you.
Thank you very much. I am in rural area. I talked to Logan about this, and my camera, everything shut down. So I'm using the phone to connect. I can't even see you guys anymore. I don't know what happened here. But I will do this, and thank you very much with everybody else's conversation. They all lead to what I would like to share in a few minutes time we have left. My name is Kathleen Liang. I'm the Kellogg Distinguished Professor of Sustainable Agriculture and the Director of Center for Environmental Farming Systems at North Carolina A&T State University. Now, my topic that Logan asked me to talk about relates to diversity, inclusion in extension and the industry. I think all the presenters build on a very strong relationship between our work, what we do, and how we can utilize our work to create impact. Now, this is beyond individual career path. But without being able to see you, could you just put in the chat box, thank goodness my chat box is still working, just type in the chat box of answering my question. My question to each person is, are you with a land-grant institution? Just tell me yes or no. That'll be great. I'll give you 5 seconds to type these 2 words, all right? Everybody typing? Everybody say yes? Oh, one said no, okay. All right, so obviously a majority of our participants are from land-grant. Now, can you type the answer? Would you please type your answers about the 3 pillars of the land-grant institution if you know it? I'll still give you 3 seconds. Let's see. All right, people are still responding pretty well. Okay, whoa, somebody's smart, got REP there. That's great, very creative. Now, the industry and the extension work is really closely related to our mission and our purpose. Now, my last question for all the grad students, not the faculty here, is how many of you have thought about extension being a career path? Have you thought about that, working with extension or industry-related jobs beyond the academic? That's a yes or no? Hey, that's great. Everybody said yes, you thought about it. All right, now here comes the challenge for you. In the extension and the industry perspective, it's the most lacking in diversity and inclusion. And I can say it, and I know you're recording it, because throughout my own experience, beyond what Norbert just described, the situation, the challenge in his path as a grad student, not only I've been to the institutions without many aspects of diversity or inclusion, the communities I've worked and lived with, most of people have never seen an Asian woman before, not to mention an Asian woman working in agriculture in the field using tractor, growing really strange vegetables, all right? So I probably have been through all kinds of challenges in the extension and industry perspective as a faculty. I'm one of the few faculty members in the country with a three-way appointment, research, teaching, and extension. Now, when we work in the field, most of the time people don't think about who we are. They look at our identity for what we do with them. Now, keep in mind that we work with people, we work with the place, and we work with a perceived value, and each person will come to the table when we talk about the issue with different perceptions. Earlier, there were people talking about, don't worry about failure, don't worry about people picking on you, don't worry about any negativity that could be imposed on you as an individual. It doesn't represent your work. Now, in the field work from the extension and the industry perspective, sometimes that conflict comes out more strongly than you can imagine. Not because they don't respect us or they have not thought about what we do are important. Now, just remember this, people don't know what they don't know. If they have never worked with you as a different kind of person, bringing different kind of ideas, creating different kind of initiatives, you got to give people a chance. So I have a few things, not necessarily the best practices, but some key points that my mentors throughout my career had taught me. And this is to honor my mentors. Most of my mentors passed. Well, I'm not a young person anymore. I've been in the field for more than 30 years. So this is to honor my mentors and keep their legacy alive to the young generation that you're listening here. There are a few key points. Number one, keep an open mind. When we work in extension and industry perspectives, people usually have a very narrowly defined focus and the mission. It's very different from school. They have jobs to do. They have one focus they have to accomplish. So very naturally, you would feel like, my gosh, how come these people are so narrow-minded? Don't think like that. That's just because they have a target that's very different from what school had taught us. Number two, be willing to go to the people and listen and observe how they work with each other. And most importantly, read local newspapers. That's what my mentors taught me. When I started working with the field people in Western Nebraska, I was a new graduate, new PhD, went to Western Nebraska for 2 years, living among people of color, native tribal people, immigrant workers, you name it. That's a very diverse area. And the first thing my mentor reminded me was, you got to pick up a local newspaper or listen to the radio or do whatever you need to do to learn about the local politics, because that's the best way to understand how they communicate with each other and how I could communicate with them. Instead of bringing in university jargons, I got to use local language. Now, you probably can tell I have a Southern accent. Believe it or not, my Southern accent landed me the best job I could ever imagine with this big title in North Carolina. It helps. And number three, we all have to emerge in activities, initiatives, and be a part of the engaging entity with the local community, because that's the people we provide service to. That's the target audience we need to understand and work with them. So the best way is to create a supporting network around the communities we work with. Don't be afraid to change or to adapt, but you don't have to change who you are. I've been always true to myself. I say what I think, and I always apologize after I say what I think, because I know I definitely offended somebody, but I keep up the spirit that they can criticize. I will say this to you, and again, I know this is recorded. I had people spit on me in the public when I conducted a training workshop, and this is in North Carolina. So this is not back in 30 years ago. This is just very recent. I've been in North Carolina 4 years. So don't be afraid to test out your spirit and your knowledge, but you do have to understand people don't know what they don't know. And have an opportunity to work with them, to show them your spirit, your knowledge, your skill, that you can bring in value to the community, to the people. Instead of changing anything, just become a part of the community and work with the issues together. There are a few keywords I'd like to share with you to conclude my thoughts here. And please feel free to write it down. Always say thank you, no matter what they did to you. And always respond with it depends. Don't say yes or no right away. Just say it depends. And number three, say let's think about it together. Bring people to the table with you. And finally, you always say this when people ask you to do something, you always say, I will get back that to you. So thank you very much. And that concludes my presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kathleen. I know we're getting really close to 2 o'clock, and I know you guys might have other things, but is anybody, maybe we can take maybe 1 to 2 questions that the graduate students may have posed. Looks like Eric has.
Somebody asked me if speaking with an accent. I missed that. There is a question about.
I can read it for you, Kathleen. Is speaking with an accent a big issue on the job market and extension work? This gives me a lot of chills lately, being a U.S. national.
Not necessarily, no. I was born and raised in Taiwan. I came to this country to study, just like some of the international students. That's not an issue. And you just keep practicing, keep talking. It helps, but language has never been a problem for me and other colleagues who are successful in extension.
Any other questions that graduate students might have? Feel free to write it in the chat or pop up on audio. Well, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. So I'd really like to thank all of our panelists. So please give them a round of applause. Again, really appreciate your time and your insights. We know that we don't have all the answers, but I think this insight is really good for graduate students as they prepare for whatever career path that they may go on. If you didn't get to ask your question, we can link you up with one of these faculty members. But again, thank you for your time. And I will see you guys hopefully at the next meeting next year if we get to have it.